This is the Kingdom Movement Podcast, a place where we will explore, through conversation, how discipleship, theology, and community really can transform our world. Hey guys, this is Jake and Paulo back with another episode of the Kingdom Movement Podcast.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about how we as Christians or followers of Jesus should handle money. Ooh, this should be a goodie.
I think that's a fun one. I think for a couple of our groups, couple of interactions that we had, people always said, "Oh yeah, I want to be rich." I remember like one of our groups, our first group at IDM. Yeah, it started because of that conversation. We were just talking, and this girl just was like, "Oh yeah, I want to be rich." And then that's when everything started there.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very important subject, and that everyone thinks have something to say.
For sure.
Everyone have an opinion about it, and I think a lot of things came out from that. A lot of, I would say, bad theology, kind of, prosperity.
For sure.
Theology. It comes from that idea of, oh yeah, we should be rich. And so I think it's a very good thing for us to talk about right now. So yeah, I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, at least, I don't know, you can tell me if this is maybe a somewhat joke that happens in churches in Mozambique. But every year, kind of in the States, pastors have like a plan of kind of like the different topics they want to talk about each year. And inevitably, tithing and like money is always like a sermon series or a message on Sunday. And the pastor always jokes about that basically everyone's just waiting for this sermon to happen where the pastor's asking them for money. And
wow. I don't think that's I
think not a joke.
The opposite there.
Okay, really?
People don't like those services.
No, I'm saying they don't like them either. But they make a joke of like, when is this going to happen? You get what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, I remember some friends who are pastors would invite someone to talk about that because they
don't want to talk about this.
They don't want to talk about it. So they would go to other churches to talk about it because it always felt like, oh, the pastor now is asking us for money, So it's a very awkward thing, I think, once you become a church leader to even talk about it, because then you are like walking into this very tiny line where like you have to make these people understand that this is biblical, but then also the church needs that money.
Yeah.
But then also people, they don't want to give their money away. So,
and I think there's so many factors that flow around it, but I think, to not ramble on, it really shows how important but how sensitive of a topic it is.
Yes.
Because there's so many factors of like, who's making what, where is this money going to, I make a certain amount, or I have these problems in my life. And really, I think it reveals a lot of like what we value. So what we invest in, we value. And then also like what we don't understand at times, or like what we don't trust.
Yeah.
And I think, money becomes a huge area of our lives that really, like, if you were going to say, show me the proof, you know what I mean, of what you actually like, what you actually care about, what you actually like invest in. I mean, money's number one, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like a lot of people invest a lot if they have the disposable income to do so. Maybe they invest in entertainment, or they invest in books, or they invest in board games or video games or computer programs, or you know what I mean? It shows everything that we use our money for shows what we value in a sense, right?
Yes, and I think there are a lot of things you can spend your money on. You know, so your choice into this is what I'm gonna put my money on.
Yep.
Really, really reveals your heart. So I think we have a really good introduction about this subject.
Yeah.
So I think we can go straight into it. So why is money important subject for Christians?
Yeah, I think biblically, money is actually the most talked about subject in the Bible, if you can believe it or not. And so it really, really reveals that if the Bible's talking about it that much, this is something that we have to prioritize. And I think even though it's a hard conversation, it's an awkward conversation. And I think it's awkward sometimes in the sense of like, when I talk about money with you, I'm involving, both of us. I'm talking about something personal to you, how you spend your investments, the amount of income that you have. Sometimes, especially I think in the States, there's a value system to the amount of income you make. I think that's probably true here as well. You know what I mean? So people keep those cards close to the chest, whether it's maybe because of shame, maybe they feel like they don't make enough, so they have a lower value of themselves, or maybe they make a lot and they don't want people to know that so that they can't make claims to them, right? Like, hey, can you help me? So all that to say, money affects a dramatic portion of our lives, right? It affects almost everything: how we eat, where we live, the things that we get to do, don't get to do, the education that we can receive, that we don't get to receive, all those things. So anyways, I think a good place to start is in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 2 through 10. We have it down here in the notes. I'll just read it real quick. It says, "Teach these things, Timothy." This is Paul writing a letter to his disciple, Timothy. "And encourage everyone to obey them." I think that's important. "Some people may contradict our teachings, but these are the wholesome teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. These teachings promote a godly life," right? Okay, so things we're teaching you, things we're handing to you, this is what a godly life looks like. "Anyone who teaches something different," I love Paul, "is arrogant and lacks understanding. Such a person has an unhealthy desire to quibble or argue over the meaning of words. This stirs up arguments, ending in jealousy, division, slander. These people always cause trouble. Their minds are corrupt, and they have turned their backs on the truth. To them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy." Whoa. If there's not a lot of evangelists or prophets or apostles that doesn't describe, then
Yes. Yeah. And I think the last part is kind of like where it hits straight into the wound.
Yes. And I think I want to pause here. There's more that we're going to read, but like, it's that idea sometimes of, I don't know if people feel guilty or we feel like, here's this man of God, we need to take care of him, or he's such a godly type person, we should bless him. But Paul is literally saying, like, some of these fools that lack understanding, they have evil suspicions, right? They're causing trouble. Their minds are corrupt, right? They've turned their backs on the truth. This is harsh language. And he's saying all of it's just a show to become wealthy. And what's wild to me is this letter's probably written anywhere from 20 to 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And this was already a problem. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? So this is nothing new. It's not like a modern day phenomenon in our world, but like people from the beginning have tried to use godliness, have tried to use church, have tried to use personality to become wealthy, right? Through godliness. So he goes on to say, "Yet true godliness," this is the key, "with contentment is itself great wealth." So not just the show of godliness, but true godliness, true godlikeness is what godliness is like. So practicing, how we would put it, practicing the life of Jesus, putting that into implementation is actually great wealth in and of itself. "After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content." So Paul's basically saying here, like, the kind of person you are becoming in Christ is actually the real great wealth. Because the reality is like all these things that we have, whether it's our clothes, our computers, or you name it, even our education, all those things we can't take with us. That we were born into this world with nothing. We were literally naked baby, dependent on everyone else. And when we leave this world, we don't get to take any of that stuff with us. And so the reality is the only thing that you can take is who you've become. And so, he's saying if we have enough food to eat, if we have clothing, if we have our basic needs, right? If we can have what we need to survive, let's just be content, right? We don't need to chase after the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis and the whatever, but rather let us be content. And then he says, but people who long to be rich, it makes me think of that IDM conversation. Sorry, I'm stopping a lot, but this is just it's so good because it hits a lot of our heart issues right on the head, in the sense of like, I mean, how many people have you run into on campus that you ask them, what's your goal in life? I want to be rich. I want to make a lot of money. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. And it really does become the truth of like how many people have chased wealth and ended up just shipwrecking their own lives because they couldn't learn to be content, right? For the love of money, not money itself, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. So that's the end of the Timothy verse. And I just think about, we look at our world's problems. We look at the wars, the violence, the anger, that's big picture. We look at broken families. We look at divided families. We look at, the broken relationships, and how many of those things are based on, in a sense, the greed of other people's resources, other people's wealth, other people's financial stability. And you see that Paul's like hitting it right on the head, because he says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Like, there's an Instagram account I follow that has a bunch of like African news on it, and like one of the big things they keep hitting on is like the issue in Congo, where essentially they're saying like proxy forces are using Ugandan soldiers to like take over the uranium in Congo, and millions of people are being displaced and killed in Congo. And what is that all about? It's about a resource that provides security for, both Rwanda and the people who are behind some of those things. And so lives are being destroyed because of a desire for resources, right, that don't belong to these other places. And that's just one example. I mean, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, like all of these are about resource-based desires that plunge our lives into ruin. Thousands upon thousands, millions upon millions of people have died in history for the sake of people wanting more, essentially. Money is just a representation of the resources that we want for our lives.
Yeah, and I think bringing that home, I mean like into personal life too. I think sometimes we see these and we just kind of think about the big picture.
Yeah.
But even us personally, we cheat, we lie because of this money. I've been reading some of these books. I don't normally read the gurus or those books about motivation and how to get rich and all those things, but in some sense there is any message, which is if you really need money, you have to cut a lot of things in your life. You have to become this person who's really focused, on this money thing. And then it's just, for me, it just shows how once you really, really become this person who bases his life into finding the money or like having more money, the money becomes your religion, kind of, it becomes your God, because then you really have to think about money, have to think about how to make money. You wake up like how to make more money, how to have this idea, how can I make my idea, how can I improve my idea, and all those things. And just think about most of those rich people's marriage. They end because the person who makes more money kind of have no time for the family. is so distracted and so involved into that. And the funny thing is, yesterday I was having a conversation with some friends, and then some of them, they were just saying that they don't want to have kids, before the mid 30s and all those things, because they want to make a lot of money. So it kind of this desire kind of shape every single part of our life.
Yep.
And fruit of the evil, yes, because look at all these bad businesses that exist over there. It's because people want to make money.
Yep.
People found this easy way to make money. I look at like things like, for example, pornography, which is the one of the richest industries that exist. It's because people thought, okay, then me sitting in my house selling images of myself, and then just makes me get more money.
Yep.
And then because people are consuming it, and then more money goes in there, and then it becomes this big business. And you just look at all businesses, all things that exist there. People are attracted by this idea of, I'm gonna make more money.
And you look at it, and I think this more than anything is the pervasive evil of our world, because even the addiction to our smartphone, social media, is all based on the idea of how can I make $1 off of the consumer, right? And that idea of that making money is the top priority above what these things do to us, right? Like, I think of the food in the States, right? Like how highly processed and awful a lot of the food is that side, but it's because it's cheaper. It can be mass produced. It can be sold at a lower cost to make higher profits. And we literally are giving up our health in order to make more money, right? And in a sense, you just realize, like you're saying, how much money has shifted from we are chasing, or we're trying to get money for ourselves, to now we literally live for money. Money now owns us. Yes. We don't own money. And it becomes a huge problem, right? And like you're saying, the head of house might say, I'm trying to provide for my family. But the reality is like that family can be neglected, not felt loved by their father or mother or whoever is the one making the money. And yet we can say that we're doing this for our family, right? When in reality, I think your kids probably would rather have you than what you can give them. And really that just becomes an excuse to serve our idol, right? To follow our idol. And so getting on that subject, there's a few verses that we wrote down that talk about money in our hearts, right? So Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So Hebrews is giving the promise of like, hey, like, don't chase after money. Be content because God is with you. He's not going to abandon you. Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So where you're investing, what you value, that's what your heart is going to chase after. Ecclesiastes 5:10, whoever loves money never has enough. Isn't that so true? You see these guys who are making millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and it's like, it's not enough for them. Like American football players, like they're talking about like my worth, and they're coming off of let's say, okay, great example, Patrick Mahomes. If you're into American football at all,
I think I remember him.
You know who that is. He's the best quarterback, best player right now in the NFL. And he signed a $500 million contract, guaranteed $250 million from, probably on his original deal was making $20 to $30 million. And it's like $20 to $30 million. Bro, that's more GDP than some countries, right? And it's like, but that's not enough. You know what I mean? The $500 million. And then the next contract around, he's going to ask for more because I know my quote unquote worth. And it's like, Ecclesiastes is right. The love of money is never enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless, right? Because it just becomes an endless chase for a desire, a hunger that's built in all of us, right? To be satisfied, to be content, to feel like we have enough. But basically what go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The thing is, I want to kind of direct this conversation a little bit in this area to something, because, for example, I think we've read this verse, this Matthew 6:25,
Yeah.
a lot in our groups, and one thing that I really get, and I think it's a rock that I will always hit whenever I'm leading a group in this subject, in this verse,
Yeah.
is that it sounds like people already know this, but it's really, really hard for them to accept this as a truth.
Yeah.
It's very hard for them to accept this as a truth. So it's one of these verses where people kind of skip it, or when we're talking about, no one wants to say anything about it because it just contradicts a lot of things that books are selling, those gurus are selling, internet is selling, YouTube, Instagram is selling something else. So for me, I want us to talk about why do you think that that's the issue? Why do you think this is a truth that is really hard for people to accept right now?
I think the thing that we have to come to realize is we don't live in a world where we believe in Aphrodite as the goddess of love, or there's no Ares, the god of war. Or, we don't believe in those actual figures anymore, but the manifestations of those gods, meaning the heart behind why ancient peoples personified those things, love, war, money, they are still very active in this world. And we live in a world that is full of idols. We live in a culture that is full of idol worship. We just don't recognize it as that, right? And I think understanding as a follower of Jesus is like, you live in a culture that will continually feed you idol worship. Just as Paul talked to his Gentile listeners throughout all his letters, like, hey, you need to stay away from this because it's going to corrupt you. It's going to pull you back into the world of idols that you are comfortable with. And I think as a modern day follower of Jesus, we have to be aware that we have the same issue. It just manifests itself in a different way. I'm using my Gen Z word, manifest. But so what does that mean? Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. We have to learn through the practices of our lives to put our treasures in different things than what our culture is telling us to value. So yeah, you're right. Like, you can read a guru book, and I'm glad you brought that up, of you were reading it and it actually made you kind of feel a little bit appalled of like, yo, all these guys think about is money. You have to literally form your life around how can I make money. And it's true. I made a joke in the group the other day, and some of the students are like, I didn't know you knew that was a joke. But like, someone was on their phone during D group, and he was writing the notes, but he's taking a long time. And I said, are you checking your Forex? You know what I'm saying? And I guess that's a joke. I didn't realize that. But the reason why that's become a joke is people who are involved in that have to constantly be giving it their attention, right? And so it becomes the place where they're investing their time, their resources, their heart is in it, right? And I think where your treasure is, where you're investing, what you value, what you choose to practice your life around, is going to direct your heart. So it doesn't say where your heart is where your treasure is. Yes. It says where you direct your investment, your heart is going to follow. And so that means where we practice investing our lives is going to lead our hearts in a certain direction, right? So we can invest in the kingdom of God, both in our resources, our time, our commitments, and our hearts will follow, or we can invest in other things, right? And eventually our hearts are going to follow it there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think realizing how money is an actual God. Money is an actual God that begs for our attention.
Yes.
And I don't think now actually the God begs for our attention, because now I think everything it's built around money. Everything is built around that, so that we are the ones who are like kind of begging for the money's attention. Then they're the opposite, So I think it's so hard for us to understand that, even for us Christians, I've seen
Yeah.
it's so hard for Christians to understand that money, it's really this very dangerous thing.
For sure.
But once you really understand that, you start having peace. You start like just realizing like, okay, my life really needs to change, and I just revolve around that.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't want to touch this that much, but just like the issue of parenting, the issue of father abandoning, it's because of that pressure. People think, oh yeah, I need to make more money, So now I have this kid, this accident, they call them accident. I got this girl pregnant. I don't want it. I just want to run. I just want to go and try to make more money, So it's just like a lot of things, a lot of decisions, bad decisions are involved around that. And the sooner we realize that, and the sooner we really change our heart, the better it's for us.
Yeah. And I think part of that too, like recognizing it in our lives, is like we can, let's say you're at a place where it's like you just want a car, right? And you get the car, but after some time, maybe you get a Honda Fit or whatever. And but then the Honda Fit's not enough, right? Yes. Then maybe you want the Volkswagen Polo, and then you're like, nah, I want to get a little bit bigger SUV. And then it's like, well, you get that, and that gets old as well. And it's like there's a great line in this book I've been reading called Sacred Fire, and he talks about we are unsatisfiable beings because we were created to have the infinite God, live and dwell in us, right? His spirit to dwell in us. So nothing but the infinite God will satisfy us. We are unsatiable creatures. We will constantly consume anything that isn't God, right?
Yes.
And I think that's so important to understand, is like we will never be satisfied until we find our contentment in who God has created us to be. And not even who God has created us to be, but in who he is, right? Yeah. In the trust of him taking care of us, that he will provide for us. And I think the really important thing to understand is not that we shouldn't want to be taken care of. God literally says, I want to take care of you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. We'll see here in a little bit that Jesus says, don't worry, because God knows what you need. So there's an understanding from God that like, he knows that we have needs. He knows that we even have wants and desires that like probably go beyond what we actually quote unquote need. But the point is that those things don't direct our lives. Like we're not focusing our treasure, our lives, our attention on getting the peripheral things, but it's on God, how do I become the person you desire me to be so that I can use the resources that you give me to be a blessing, a place of life rather than curse, right?
Yes. And I think that what you said about unsatisfaction that exists in us, I think that's what fuels a lot of things we do, as Christians. Imagine, like, have you ever met someone just like, I know God enough that I don't really need to read more about him. I know the Bible enough that I don't really need to read the Bible.
I met one of those. No.
Yeah.
But, I'm just messing.
But yeah, you meet those, you're just like, okay, this is a proud, this is someone that I want to avoid, because we all know that even when you invest your attention into knowing God more, it's just this infinite that you dive into it, you get closer and closer, and the closer you think you're getting, the more doors get opened, the more realization, the more understanding you get open. And I think if you start feeding that that unsatisfaction part of ourselves into the right thing, you really start having this happier life, because then that's when you really start understanding your God. You still start understanding the world that God placed us. You start understanding your role in this place, and then you find yourself focusing on the thing that God really wants you to focus in. You find yourself, your life with this purpose, something or some infinite that you can really explore and find satisfaction on those infinite.
No doubt. And I think getting into it too, this is another verse when you talk about people try to avoid it, where don't get to the real hard issue in D group a lot of times, is when we talk about in Matthew 6:24, it says, no one can serve two masters. Mm-hmm. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And I say that because oftentimes when we do this verse, someone always inevitably talks about something other than money.
Yes.
That as a master that they maybe need to work. And it's funny to me that we take this verse and then we always try and talk about, well, maybe I need to put this aside. But we usually run from the idea of money, God and money, as the two masters that are waging war. And when we say money too, I think it's important to understand that money, when you hold a 10 pula note up, it's only a representation of the value of something, right? That piece of paper, if there was no value behind it, wouldn't mean anything. Yes. So it's not the piece of paper that we're necessarily loving. It's what it can get us. Mm-hmm. It's what we would consider maybe security, a good life, comfort. Maybe it's status. You know what I mean? The love of money, there are many idols that sit behind the piece of paper, if that makes sense. So even that, it's like it becomes a war of who do you trust to provide for your needs? Do you trust God, or do you trust, what essentially you can do on your own, or what these things can provide for you? Do you think once you have that house, that job, this facade of life, that now your problems will go away? But the issue is the people who do get that life, that do get that house, do get that car, do get those name brand clothes, they soon discover that all the problems that they had before, they just brought with them into a fancier place, right? And the anger and the lust and the insecurities, all those things still remain even once money has given you the quote unquote life that you wanted, right?
Yes.
So I would say money often creates like the illusion that we are in control, because that's the other issue, is like we often don't want to trust God because that means we have to give up some semblance of control over our lives, right? Whereas money, if we can make money, we often feel like, even the idea of when people say, I'm a self-made man or a self-made woman, like I just kind of laugh at that, because the reality is we are all a product of like other people's investment in us, right? And yes, maybe you started a business with your intellect, your great idea, but that great idea came from somewhere, right? You got inspired by someone. You probably had investors that helped you. And so you're not self-made in the sense of like doing it all on your own, right? But that idea of self-importance, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, all of these are like the idolatry that money can create in our hearts, is like, I can do this on my own. And at the end of the day, that's the lie that Adam and Eve believed in the garden, is God is afraid that you'll become like him. That's the serpent's lies. If you eat this fruit, you can become God of your own life. And I think money is a manifestation of that desire to control our own lives, to feel like, because why do you want a lot of money? Well, I can take my family to private hospital now. I have a control over my health that I didn't have before. I can pick the school that I want to go to so that I have the best education, or my kids can have the best education. I have control over that now in my life. And, I'm not saying that good healthcare, good education shouldn't be available to people. That's not what I'm saying. But we often chase money in order to get what we want for ourselves, rather than trusting for God to provide for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the Bible is clear. Money just comes and substitutes God. It changes the place that you were supposed to practice trusting. You were supposed to practice patience, which are virtues that no one wants to really shape them. No one wants to really practice, because they're not easy virtues. Because behind those virtues lies a very important and a very peaceful life. Yep. But it's really hard to kind of skip, or kind of like go through that narrow road, thorny road that you have to go through to be able to develop those virtues in you to get to the other side. So money is just an easy way to that. It's just like, okay, other than me practicing this virtue of practicing trust, I can just go use the money and then just trust that the money, or trust that the hospital that I'm paying will take care of me. other than trusting that God will provide, I can just trust that whenever I want something, I'll just go to the shop and just get it and then give it to my family. Other than trusting that God will protect my family, and then I can trust the best company, the best security company like G4S, whatever, that will come and then protect my family. So we just unload, we just take those things that we're supposed to give it to God. And then we just take those things and then put it on the man's hand. So then we just start living this peaceful life that we have. But then where there's money, there's always evil, That's when we realize like security is never enough, healthy insurance, there is no best health companies that will really, really give you life. And
we all die.
Exactly. We all die and we all get sick. We all get cancer, So it's just this one thing that
a car wreck, anything, right?
Exactly. You can't buy the safest car in the world, There's no such thing, whenever something happens, it happens and then you will die.
And I think the other aspect of that too is when money becomes our security, we have to keep money and we have to make more money in order to feel secure. And so we end up, as we'll look here in James here in a second, like potentially oppressing other people in order to keep our security. So rather than trusting in God to provide and leaning on him and viewing other people as valuable, we often, in order to keep ourselves secure, have to put other people in an insecure place, right? So we become selfish, we become self-centered, we think only about our own security or our own tribe's security, right? And we lose sight of the bigger picture of like, if from a Christian perspective, how are we blessing those outside of us? And even that is a big problem of Jesus's contemporaries. Like they viewed God's blessing as only for them. And Jesus was calling them to recognize, no, you were meant to bless the world, right? Through what God is going to do to you. So I think I have the story of the rich young ruler, or at least the last end of it. I think we can just slide into maybe as the next transition, like, oftentimes we desire to be rich or we desire to have a lot. But Jesus and his disciples really have a lot to say against the rich, or at least how difficult it is to be a follower of Jesus and be rich. So Jesus says, I tell you the truth, it's very hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. I'll say it again, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. And it's what we've been talking about, that self-reliance, that trusting in wealth rather than God. Like it really, when the practicality of our lives calls us to either trust God or trust money, if you have money, it's a lot harder to trust God, right? Than for those that have no other choice in a sense, right?
Exactly. That's why sometimes people say Christianity is a religion for the poor.
Yep. And I think, again, James, so Jesus' brother, says that James doesn't hold back on very much, but he goes on to say this in his book. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. We don't preach this on Sunday. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves for the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. And it's like this super harsh, violent almost language against those who have thought they have made themselves secure at the expense of other people, right? And that's kind of, we've touched on that. We don't need to go that much deeper, but I look around and even, I've commented a couple of times to you, like these guys next door doing construction who are here like 12 hours a day, sometimes 6-7 days a week. And it's like, they're getting paid pretty much, I don't even know if they could live base essentials off of what they're getting paid. And, and then you see the big bosses coming in and it looks like he's eating all their lunches a couple of times. And you just see what James is talking about, living out in reality, in the sense of like, God won't stand for that, right? And at the end of the day, that injustice, that taking advantage of people, like there are going to be people who have held tightly to their security and found that it wasn't really as secure as they might have assumed it had been, right?
Yeah, and I think it also, like, kind of what he was saying. People normally, whenever we really are looking for money, or we kind of have successful life, there's one thing that we really forget, that there are people behind that money that are important, that those people have values, those people have lives. And then we normally forget that in the place of making more money. If we can cut their salary to make more money, we'll do it. If we can cut a little bit of other expenses, other bonus, other things that would help them as humans, to make more money, we just start cutting those things, because then we lose the value of life. We lose the value, the important. We start not understanding why people are people.
We don't see them as people.
Exactly. We just see them as tools that come to help us make more money.
Yep. And I think, we can transition into, so how do we as Christians handle money, right? How do we as followers of Jesus? We'll talk about, let's say you come from a maybe more well-off background, and then for those who are maybe in a struggling background financially. But I think this isn't in the notes, but I do want to touch on this. It's really important for us as Christians, like, to invest in the kingdom of God. Like, I know sometimes maybe if you go to a church where you don't feel like you can trust your investment to the church, one, I would say, why are you going to that place if you can't trust the leadership with your money? But two, that is a huge problem. I won't say it for the sake of honoring the organization I'm with, but even many pastors haven't tithed in the organization that we're here with. And it's like, that shows a lack of understanding of, like, together, the mission of God does need money, right? In order to reach people, in order to have the materials that we need, the buildings to build, the communities and the opportunities. Money, lots of money flows in different ways. We're sitting in a room with, computers to make this podcast, which were bought by money, right? Yeah. And they are resources to use either for the kingdom or for ourselves. And it's like, I would say, we talk about the 10% tithe or whatever. That is a baseline of what can we all give, right? Because maybe you make 100 pula, it's equivalent to whatever you make. 100 pula, it's 10 pula. If it's 100,000 pula, it's 10,000 pula. You know what I mean? It equals out. And kind of the tangent I'm trying to go on is, regardless if we're rich or if we're poor or whatever it is, we all can contribute to the kingdom. And we should be, because the mission goes forward when we are willing to invest, right?
Yeah.
And I think in the reality of, for those who have a lot of money, the Bible does have a lot to say. It says, command, again in 1 Timothy 6, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, so not putting their status and their pride in what they have, nor to put their hope in their wealth, right? There's that idea, which is so uncertain, right? Stock market crashes tomorrow, you die in a car wreck, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share, so not hoarding it for themselves. So Paul's not saying it's wrong to be rich, but what he's saying is it's wrong to place your hope in riches. It's wrong to be stingy and unwilling to help those who can't meet their own needs, right? And in this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of a life that is truly life. So essentially he's saying, make sure they know, like, this life isn't about what you can gain for yourself, but God has now blessed you, put you in a position of having financial resources to use. Now, how are you going to use that to create hope, to create life in the community that you belong to, right? And to place your hope in God. And then it goes on to say as well, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, this is in Deuteronomy, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. And again, it's a warning to the wealthy. So it's this idea that they're called to be generous to God and neighbor, right? And go ahead.
So yeah, and I think tied to this, like, this is one big troubleshoot I always tell my friends. Like, if you feel like 10% is too much for you to give to God,
Yeah.
then just know that the way you view your money, it's wrong. If 10% you think it's too much for you to give God, then you really need to really think and meditate into how you see this money, because I think then you're seeing them in all this, the bad ways possible, and then you're seeing this money as fully yours. You're seeing as it like you're the one who fully, worked to make this money.
True.
You were the one who planted the tree that your company used to make the paper that you then sold to make that money. You're the one, you think that you're the one who built the house that the building that your company is based on. So it's just, there are a lot of things that sits behind that idea of you saying, I'm not able, I can't tithe, because that's just too much.
Yep. And even the idea of we might pray for God to give us an opportunity, he gives it to us, and then we think, I earned this money. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think as well, like, when it comes to money, this is something that's been kind of helpful for me. It's not my responsibility as the giver, right? It's on leadership's responsibility to use that money wisely and for the kingdom, right? And they will be held accountable to God and eventually the community if they're misusing funds, right? I'm not saying they should be let off the hook, you know what I'm saying? But they will be held accountable for how they use the money. But your responsibility, your accountability to God is to be generous, right? So it's not, people will misuse money. Of course, people will misuse money. We misuse money all the time. I'm not saying me and you personally, but like humans in general have a tendency to misuse money, right? But your responsibility is to be faithful with what God has asked you. And then God will hold leadership accountable through community, through accountability systems. But leadership's responsibility is to use that money wisely, right? And so I think don't use that as an excuse to say, oh, I can't give because how do I know they're going to use it wisely? That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to be generous towards God and his kingdom and his community. And then the flip side is that leadership has to be accountable to God. But he goes on to say this. I didn't write down the book and chapter reference, but it says, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, right?
Yeah, that's 2 Peter.
Okay.
That's 1 Peter 5.
Yeah, so these, Timothy, this letter that Peter's writing, these are all the church leadership, right? Yes. And it's constantly talking about be faithful, don't do things dishonestly, be eager to serve, right? Like, give the Lord from your wealth. And the idea is that it's going to produce not only goodness in the community, but it's going to form you into a person that is generous at heart, that is someone that is life-giving rather than cursing. Yeah. And I find this interesting. Then Jesus said to some soldiers, and what should we do? They asked him. Don't extort money, and don't accuse people falsely. Be content with your pay. Yeah. And it's just, it makes me think of so many times I've been pulled over by the police. But but even that, right? It's like, I remember in South Africa, one of the cops was taking me to write up a ticket, and he says, settle with your accuser quickly. Wow. You know what I mean? Because he was wanting me to pay a bribe. Otherwise, we're going to take you to jail. And I wish I would have had this verse in my mind. I would have said, and you, what should you do? Don't extort money and don't accuse people falsely to be content with your pay. But anyways, I think it's really important for us to understand, like, contentment is saying, God, like, I trust you in this moment, in this current circumstance. Here are the desires of my heart. There's nothing wrong with bringing those before God. But saying, God, you are what I need. I trust you to provide what I need. And here are some dreams that I have, but I place them in your hands. Yes. I commit them to you. So for the rich, it's being generous. It's being open-hearted. It's not being closed-fisted, but it's being good stewards of what God has given you, being generous towards God, generous towards people, and allowing that to form your heart into a kind of person that's not stingy. And then for the poor, or for those who are maybe in more difficult circumstances, Jesus goes on to say in Matthew 6, I won't read it for the sake of time, but like, don't worry about your life, right? Don't chase after the things you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, because this is what pagans do, right? This is what, in modern day language, let's put it in 21st century. Look at the world around you. They're chasing the Gucci brands, the cars, the YouTube channel success, the influencers. This is what your culture is chasing after. But that isn't what is for you. Don't worry about those things, right? Seek first what I'm calling you to do, where I have placed you, how to become a person of life and of hope. But the reality is we're not meant to be the kind of people that just chase after culture, right? Like, we are called and meant to be people that are fixated on who God is and who he wants us to be. And the needs, it says, seek God's kingdom above everything else, live righteously. So practice the way of Jesus. So it's seek God's kingdom, seek what he's doing in the world, live righteously, practicing the life that God has given you, and he will give you everything that you need. That's the promise, right? That's straight from Jesus's mouth. And don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. And it's this idea of like, don't become a person fixated on, what you don't have, but become a person of contentment, trusting God, doing what you know you need to do, and God will take care of the rest, right? That's his promise to us.
Yes. So I think, those are virtues that are really hard for us to understand, and they are against a lot of things that you'll see on YouTube, you'll see on Instagram, you'll see on any book about how to get rich. Everyone else is preaching something else, something different from this. But we need to trust that the God who's saying this, the God who's promising this, is the God who knows everything. Is the God whose knowledge transcends every single human's knowledge. And we just have to also trust all the testimonies that we hear about God coming and providing, because those are true, those are virtues, those are truth that proves what God really can do in our lives. So I think it's something that we really need to cultivate in our life. It's a fruit that we really need to cultivate in our life, to be content, to accept, and to trust that God will be the one who comes and provide for us. And we take out that infinite amount of attention that we give to money, and then we put it in somewhere else. We put in somewhere that can really grow our life, grow our family, and become better husbands, better brothers, better daughters and sons. And we really focus on what really, really matters in our life. And that's what God is trying to do. God wants to want us to give our attention, to give our time, to give our emotion to the right thing, not just live a wasteful life that then at the end you start regretting every single step, every single thing that you gave.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think my final thoughts, at least, and then you can share any final thoughts you have as well. I think a posture of gratitude is a way that we can become more centered on contentment rather than focusing on what we don't have, focusing on what God has given us, right? Whether it's health or family or a roof over our head, and really just practicing thankfulness, right? And I think that will help shape us into that kind of person. And then the other thought was, this doesn't mean that we don't work hard. And in fact, it means maybe we work harder because we are serving God. We're not serving money anymore, right? And so it doesn't mean that we aren't excellent in what we try to do, but the motive behind the excellence isn't just a selfish desire for money, but it is a motive of, I want to give God my whole life because I believe that he can use my life to be a blessing to other people, right? And oftentimes the people who do have resources that truly are pursuing God can become a huge blessing to the communities around them. The people that don't hold tightly to it, right? But that God can entrust with larger resources because they are people that he knows are willing to surrender them at his feet, right? And I think God would like to entrust us with resources, but sometimes we're not always the people that are trustworthy with those things, right? Because we would end up using them for ourselves. And I think that's always the danger. Anytime you look at any sort of governmental leader or any sort of new person in power, like they may have even got into it with the right motivations, but as soon as they get those resources, they often hoard it for themselves. And so that's always a danger that we have to fight. We always have to lay down at Jesus's feet and say, I trust you more than I trust these things, right?
Yes.
Any final thoughts from you, brother?
Yeah, I think for me, I really love this book. I think I've mentioned it before, but it's by A.W. Tozer. I think it's Presence of God. I think that's it. I don't remember in English, but yeah, there's this one chapter that kind of resonated. It stuck to my heart. It says the title of the chapter is "The Gift of Not Possessing Anything." You know, it just talks about these sense and these quality that we have to cultivate, which is to give to God every single thing that we have and leave our heart open for him and not possess things and not just give this heart that we have, which is a very important place, and then just give it to those things that we possess. And then he says that once we really do that, that's when we really reach freedom, we really reach accomplishment, and we really have this peace around the things that we have.
That's
so
great.
It's something that I want to challenge every listener. You know, try to what Jake was saying. Try to be content with what you have, but don't possess anything. Your heart is a very important place that need to be filled with the right things, that need to be filled with God's love. And once you do that, that's when you really, really experience the value of life and the value of those people that are living around us. So yeah, that's my final thought to you. And it was a great conversation.
Yes,
I learned a lot. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else to say.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to find this. There's a band that I really liked growing up called Switchfoot. It says, you possess your possessions or they possess you. And if the house burns down tonight, I've got everything I need when I've got you by my side. And it's this idea of like, we have to take control of our lives and surrender those things. That idea of possess them, meaning like, take control of the power that your possessions have over you before they control you, right? And that idea of if the house burns down tonight, so if I lost everything, as long as I have you by my side, right? And I think he's referencing his family in the song, but God, the people that really matter to you, I have everything I need, And I think if we can learn more and more to have that attitude, it's a process, right? There are certain things that have our hearts more than others. But yeah, as we learn to let go of our possessions and surrender them at Jesus's feet, we can become more and more like these people that God has called us to be content, right?
Yeah. Time is not forgiving. We chase all those things, and once we reach it, we realize that the sun is going down. There is no more time.
Yep.
And there's no more time to enjoy all those things that we said we were trying to look for.
For sure.
So yeah, really value your time. Really value the things that.
Amen. You don't get it back.
No.
All right, guys. We love you, and we hope to catch you next Saturday at the worship.
Yes. Oh yeah. Next Saturday.
Well, for the American listeners, not y'all, unless you want to buy a very expensive plane ticket. But all right. See you guys.
See you.
Hey guys, this is Jake. If you are currently a university student on a campus in Botswana, we want to extend an invitation to you to get plugged into a discipleship group. So if you're interested, if that's something you want to do, if you want to begin to be a part of this family we call Kingdom Movement, we would encourage you to go into this episode's bio. There should be a link to our Instagram page. You can send us a message, and we will make sure to connect you at a time and a place that works best for you and your schedule for school. But we don't want you to miss this opportunity to get plugged in and a part of what God is doing on the university campuses here, because we believe that you're a vital piece to what God wants to do to bring his kingdom, his wholeness, and his healing to the nation of Botswana and to the university specifically. So reach out to us today, guys, if that's something you're interested in. All right, thanks.